Prime Minister Scott Morrison has addressed the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow after justifying his ongoing spat with French President Emmanuel Macron. Live to political editor Andrew Clennelly joins us from Glasgow. Andrew, good evening where you are. The cat is totally out of the bag now when it comes to Morrison and Macron's conversations. The PM accusing Macron of offending Australia now.
Yeah, well, that's right, Pete. So Scott Morrison decided to play some defence yesterday and some offence. He got onto the front foot. He was due to visit the frigate building factory at BAE here in Glasgow, but he called a press conference there. We're getting frigates from there. And he said that Emmanuel Macron, calling him a liar, was essentially a slur not just on him, but on the whole country.
I must say that I think the statements that were made questioning Australia's integrity and the slurs that have been placed on Australia, not me, I've got broad shoulders, I can deal with that, but those slurs, I'm not going to cop sledging of Australia. I'm not going to cop that on behalf of other Australians. I can deal with whatever people throw at me, but Australia has a proud record when it comes to our defence capability. That's why we'll be building these and we'll be building others, and Australia's service record, I think, needs no elaboration.
Well, Emmanuel Macron was clearly talking about Scott Morrison, not Australians. He actually made some positive comments about Australians, but he said he'd been deceived over the AUKUS deal and the cancellation of the submarine contract. Not so, said Scott Morrison. He said he had dinner in June, as we know, in the Elysee Palace with Emmanuel Macron. He said he was making it clear there was a problem then with getting conventional submarines.
I agreed to go and have that dinner because I needed to share with him where Australia's thinking was. That was the reason I went to that dinner, to let him know after the meeting with the trilateral partners about where we were at, because only at that point had it then escalated to the possibility and likelihood of us potentially going down another track. Now, at that point, I made it very clear that a conventional diesel-powered submarine was not going to meet Australia's strategic requirements. We discussed that candidly. I did not discuss what other alternatives we were looking at. They are in confidence and they were subject to the security arrangements we had about those other discussions.
And Scott Morrison said Emmanuel Macron knew there was a problem with the contract because almost straight away French military was sent to Australia to try and keep it together.
It was very clear that they were aware that the contract, Admiral Morio was sent to Australia to try and save the contract after our dinner in Elysee. So if there was no concern about the contract being under threat, Admiral Morio would never have come to Australia.
So briefed out, apparently by the Prime Minister's office, a message from Emmanuel Macron to Scott Morrison saying, look, I can't make a call that you're after. This is 3 days before AUKUS was announced, this agreement to use British and American nuclear submarine technology and cancel the French contract. But is this good or bad news about the subs? Well, I asked Scott Morrison, was there a message that you sent back at that time? So he sent you this message 2 days out from the AUKUS. And what did you message back?
I said I thought it was very important that we spoke.
Which indicated in your mind that it was about the subs.
When we weren't able to have an agreed time for a call, because we had now got to the point where we were about to announce this arrangement, and I wanted to tell him personally that we'd formed that decision, because in correspondence, as well as my own messages, I'd made it very clear that at the end of the day, Australia's national interest was going to determine our decision, and it did.
What a day of developments. Meanwhile, Andrew, the Prime Minister has also addressed the Climate Summit today.
He has, Pete, and he's had a more positive message than other leaders who are predicting doom and gloom if the world doesn't do something. Scott Morrison says we found a vaccine for coronavirus within a year. Why can't we build up the technologies to reduce emissions? And he says his aim here is not to force developing countries or countries like India and China into action. It's to encourage money from governments towards technology to help reduce emissions?
Overall, PM, what are you're only here for 48 hours. What are you seeking to achieve here? What difference do you think you can make to this summit?
Our key objective is here, not only just to advise the commitments that Australia is making and the progress we're already making, which is underappreciated, 20% plus in emissions reduction, which exceeds many other countries around the world with like economies to Australia. But the fundamental point is that if we want the whole world's emissions to go down, then the technologies that drive that, we have to drive their costs down. So much of the focus is on driving the costs up of other technologies. But what is needed is driving the costs down on the technologies that we're hoping others will take up.
At the COP26 Summit, the Prime Minister meeting 3 Pacific leaders, the leaders of Fiji, Palau and Tuvalu, and they all requested by 2030 a more ambitious target from Australia. Obviously, Australia's not doing that.
Has anyone during your time here, including those Pacific leaders, asked you for a bigger 2030 target?
Well, they always have. In every discussion I've ever had with Pacific Island leaders, that is something they've always encouraged us to do.
Okay, so we had these speeches from the leaders with Joe Biden apologising for Donald Trump exiting the Paris Agreement. He actually nodded off at one stage, or appeared to, during a long list of speeches that we heard today. And Boris Johnson saying we're at a minute to midnight on climate action here, really trying to rev the leaders to go more ambitious. We know that India have gone 2070 with a target, so that's not the target that the world wants to see, or at least UK and US. But here is Joe Biden and Boris Johnson speaking this morning.
And I guess I shouldn't apologise, but I do apologise for the fact the United States, in the last administration, pulled out of the Paris Accords and put us sort of behind the 8 ball. That's the first thing I did when elected.
Humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
Well, Scott Morrison saying, really, it's not 1 minute to midnight. If we get the technology right, we'll be right.
Looking forward, we are forging technology partnerships domestically and abroad with Singapore, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, Korea and Indonesia. And we are close to concluding one with India. Australia is investing over $20 billion over the next decade to drive the transition, leveraging private sector investment to reach $80 billion in total. Countries with net zero commitments cover over 80% of the world GDP. In Australia's case, 90% of our exports are to countries with net zero commitments. Our researchers, scientists, entrepreneurs, investors, and most importantly, our people are ready. The Australian way is to bet on them, and we think that's a good bet.
That's Andrew Clennell reporting to us live from Glasgow, and you did mention those pictures of Joe Biden appearing to fall asleep. We will get those to you because it's quite funny. I mean, in his defence, some of those speeches can be a little dry and he may well be jet lagged. But anyway, we'll get those to you. Andrew, comprehensive coverage as always, and we'll talk to you again next hour. Appreciate that. Thank you.